feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Shrimp Tank. We're excited to do this via Zoom this week. I'm your co-host Ted Jenkin here with my co-host Lee Hosman. Of course, on the Shrimp Tank, each and every week we bring you some of the brightest and best CEOs, entrepreneurs, and leaders in and around the city of Atlanta, the state of Georgia, and of course across the United States. I will tell you right now, the Shrimp Tank is booming. We are now in 13 or 14 cities. You have to check out our latest and greatest in Knoxville and Columbus, Ohio. Of course, episodes coming out of Boca Raton and Charleston and Boston and Seattle and all over the country. If you've not listened to the podcast before, I simply recommend that you go to Spotify. It's a great place to download. iHeartRadio would be great. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or anywhere around the internet. And of course, if you want to see the videos of our amazing entrepreneurs, do one of two things. Go to shrimptankpodcast.com. That way you can see all of the episodes, or you can go to our YouTube channel, The Shrimp Tank. Simply click the notifications button. You'll subscribe to the channel. You'll get everything in your inbox. This is a way to see some great 6-minute videos. And of course, a full video like this today. You'll see this all on the Shrimp Tank. In just a minute, we'll bring in our guest today, Dean Fusto. He is the president and head of the Brandon Hall School. We'll talk about that. Only one of its kind, established in 1959. And also the entrepreneurial venture he has called teachlearnlead.net. We're going to talk about that and more. But before we get to that, Lee, I want to tell you something that is going to shock you today. Shock you.
I would expect nothing less.
Since we're on the video, we may even let Dean comment in on this. But I put together an article on this, and I'm going to share with you why entrepreneurship could actually be in jeopardy in America. And now I know when I say this to you, you're saying, what? Listen to this. Last week, it came out that 61% of all Americans paid no federal tax in 2020. That's more than 100 million Americans that paid no tax. At the same time, 71% of the tax was paid by the top 10% of Americans in this country. And the divide is getting wider. Lee, what is going to happen to entrepreneurship if 70 or 80% of the people paying no taxes and the people who are paying taxes that create all the jobs are paying 80 to 90% of the taxes?
Well, Ted, let me ask you a question. Do you know why that seems like one of the largest numbers in history? The 61% did not pay taxes.
A lot of people think it's because of the pandemic, but actually it's not. The year before that, it was 53%. And you can attribute some of it to the pandemic, because I thought you might ask me that, but actually it was not. It's just the fact that either A, and this is what was interesting about this, A, people really aren't making that much money, or now a new poll came out and 10% of all Americans say, you know what, it's okay to cheat on your taxes. 1 out of 10 Americans says today, you know what, I'm just gonna do it. It's okay to cheat on your taxes.
Well, I can't speak to that, Ted, but I will tell you this much. The world is changing as we know it. We're just pivoting, as you know. You have to be more liquid, of course, in terms of what we're seeing out there. But I'll tell you, I'm gonna push back a little, Ted. I think entrepreneurship is here to stay. I understand where you're coming from, and I see Dean is agreeing with you as well. And Dean has a background a little bit here in entrepreneurship. We'll let him talk about that. But entrepreneurship is here to stay, Ted. And I will tell you, that's the place where most of our employment is coming from. That's where people can rely on getting employment, of course, and that's who's really feeding this country with the increase in employment in July. Wasn't it one of our largest months in the year? That July had the most employment in the entire year.
Still, 70 to 80% of all the jobs in America are on the backs of small business owners, of people like Dean, yourself, myself, the guys that are creating the jobs. So I just thought it was interesting. I don't know where it will head, but I share this with our viewers and listeners, these kinds of things that are out there. And I'll also tell you that I do believe that there's a pendulum swinging too in this white collar, blue collar world. There was a Reddit thread that came out, Lee, that talked about now that how many $100,000 blue collar jobs there are out there. And if your son or daughter can basically fix an air conditioner on top of a hospital or a skyscraper, they're going to make a 6-figure job.
Exactly, Ted. I've been a big fan of this for years. I actually, Dean, cut my teeth opening my own business over 25 years ago in a commercial printing company, which is majority, about 80, 90% blue collar. And I am a gigantic fan of blue collar work, of course. I'm a gigantic fan. Think of the pandemic. Everything started shutting down, but I'll tell you what didn't shut down last year: electricians, HVAC, plumbing, all landscape companies, all those things actually increased. So, you know, if you're looking, as you said, to get into an educational field or to find an area or an industry, I'd be looking into those fields, of course.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm definitely doing my part on the education side with a lot of entrepreneurial boot camps and things like that for youth to really inspire this, you know, these ideas in kids.
Well, Dean, tell us a little about, you know, to start in here, people that are unfamiliar with the Brandon Hall School. I see behind you, established 1959. Tell us a little bit about this international boarding and day school. I know you serve a very smaller segment of the educational population and that you deal with students that are in grades 6 through 12. Tell us a little about the school and what you do there.
Yeah, well, first of all, again, I want to thank you both for having me on today. And red carpet rolled out for either one of you if you ever want to visit our campus. It's amazing. We're here in Sandy Springs, kind of a hidden little campus, 24 acres, beautiful on the river. Yeah, we're on the river here. And yes, the school is celebrating its 63rd year. I'd say in the last 6 years, I came aboard with a vision to also make Brandon Hall kind of a center for entrepreneurial and leadership thought and practice for teens. But we're a grade 6 through 12. We're about 50% day, local Atlanta, 50% international, but also domestic. We have kids here from all over the United States that board with us as well.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, Dean, I wanted to bring up for our listeners, you're the only boarding school. Is that correct? And discuss for people that don't know, what is a boarding school?
Sure. You know, a boarding school, there's about 300, 350 in the US. We are the only one in the Atlanta area. And basically, I think what a lot of parents look for is that pre-college, co-educational, and college prep type experience for their kids where they learn independence, learn how to do the laundry. Don't wait till you get to college to do that. Learn those study skills. I mean, our kids are going to the best colleges in the country when they leave Brandon Hall, but while they're here, they have that opportunity to learn those skills and have that independence.
Dean,
that's
what
the
do you
beauty
think
of a boarding school.
What do you think, since you're teaching some of this stuff? I mean, do you think that the modern day public educational system is missing teaching kids about being an entrepreneur?
I think, there are definitely public schools out there that are doing it in smaller pockets, through clubs and activities like that. My thrust was I wanted to create a whole center and a vision around it. So we have the Center for Global Youth Leadership and Social Entrepreneurial Studies. It's a mouthful, but we have a center here that runs boot camps throughout the summer for kids from all over. We look for folks like you to come in and inspire and speak to these kids. And now we've also done it through the school year. We've created micro grant programs to inspire kids who want to take a passion that they have and do something with it, not waiting till college or adulthood. Do it now while you're in high school, where you can make mistakes, where the risk isn't as high. It's a pretty powerful thing.
So Dean, what prompted you to open that center for entrepreneurship?
My mom and dad were entrepreneurs before it became a buzzword. Sorry, guys, before Shrimp Tank and before Shark Tank. They were high school sweethearts. Their parents owned restaurants in the North. My mom and dad had a dream to come to St. Augustine, Florida. They bought a little shrimp house, and for 50 years, they ran that restaurant, blood, sweat, and tears.
Restaurant's one of the hardest industries, isn't it? It's one of the hardest industries.
Yeah, and I'm the baby of three. None of us wanted that restaurant, but I was there pretty much for my 18 years until I went to college, learning how to do dishes, serve people. All those lessons were learned and will never be forgotten from my parents. So
tell us a little bit about the model of the school. Is it basically, it's a private school, right? And is it just the model's predicated on tuition? Kids pay tuition and you have to figure out your staff and the real estate, or is it some through getting grants and things like that?
Sure. We are an independent school with a mission, and we're a nonprofit 501c3. So we have an advancement arm, a team that I head up that looks for grants and funding and that type of thing. We also have admissions. We are tuition based, as you said. So our primary revenue comes from tuition. But we also have other revenue streams like the summer programs, the auxiliary programs, events, and different things we run. So, it very much does operate. People don't think of schools this way, but it does operate in so many ways as a business, as an entrepreneurial venture.
And Dean, people forget about that. Nearly everything in the world operates as a form of a business, and people don't realize that's the way it stays open and functions, of course. Take a step back, Dean, if you don't mind. You are the president of the university there. How did you become the president? Did you just wake up one day and say, I want to do this? Give us a little history on you personally.
President of the United States.
Well, I told you about the influence my parents had on me, particularly my mom, and the work that she did. She also was very heavily into service and community, right? So I tried to find a profession when I was pretty young that married all the things that I was passionate about. And it led me to education. And throughout my 30-year career in this world, this industry that I'm in, I've had mentors, I've had coaches, I've had people that have inspired, pushed, and challenged me. So this was kind of a natural progression. I'm also infatuated with leadership. I read leadership literature all the time, listen to all those podcasts. So I'm always like a sponge on that topic. I'm just fascinated by it. All of those things combined, in addition to right place, right time, kind of led me to Brandon Hall. And at the time, it was a one-year executive search that most of these schools do when they're hiring a president. And I was presented with a rare opportunity to have a blank slate to paint a vision on. So we're 6 years in, and I'm happy to say most of that vision and the pieces to it have become reality, especially around that leadership, scholarship, service, and entrepreneurial piece.
Excellent. So, Dean, I'm going to throw a caveat at you, and Ted has to hear this all the time from me, so I apologize in advance, Ted.
Sure.
But, part of my background in entrepreneurship and business ownership, I've always heard that the success of business owners, entrepreneurs, is usually the combination of IQ and EQ, intelligence quotient and emotional quotient. But I'm going to have you start to do a new lesson plan there at your school, because one of the most important qualities we've always said here on the tank is AQ. Are you familiar with that, Dean?
AQ.
So IQ. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry.
I know CQ, so I'm going to get
Whoa!
Wait, what? All right, we'll come to CQ. So IQ for our listeners is intelligence quotient. Of course, EQ is emotional quotient, and it's the combination. It's like a recipe, of course. It's how successful you are, not just as an entrepreneur, Dean, but also as a human being in general. We always talk about AQ as the success of an entrepreneur, and AQ is adversity quotient. How much adversity can you take before you give up? Because you do not have to be the smartest person to be a successful business owner. You don't have to be that dialed in with people emotionally, of course, but you have to have a very large adversity quotient. Tell me, Dean, about CQ.
CQ is a cultural quotient, because when you work in a global environment, as I do here in Atlanta, we have so many different markets that we work with across the world. And I haven't traveled in the last couple of years because of COVID, but that's a whole other dimension. When you consider a school our size of around 140, and we have 30 countries represented, there's a cultural quotient, right, that you have to develop when you're working with these families, working with these kids, and bringing them all together, right, in under a unified mission of a school.
Well, Dean, I'm going to use the rule of three. I'm going to educate you on it. Ted has heard this enough. I always say when someone hears something from myself, they say, my good friend Lee told me this. The second time is, oh, I have a friend named Lee who told me this. The third time is, here's my topic on adversity quotient, or whatever topic it is. But the fourth time, you can steal it for your own. So it's the rule of three. I'm going to reference you now, Dean, on cultural quotient. I'm going to start referencing you. I'll use it at least 4 times today, so I'm going to steal it by the end of the day.
Excellent. Guys, you bring up AQ, and what an amazing, we always knew that had an impact on the leadership development, but nothing comes close to what the last 2 years have felt like in a lot of schools. I was just reading a stat last night. I just wrote an article for Empowerment in a admissions magazine that's nationwide, and the stats they were presenting were there's about 150 independent schools that have already closed their doors forever nationwide. They just couldn't make it, right? So, for us, 2 years ago, then when March hit, that uncertainty of what we were facing, that black swan moment, it galvanized our team. We were learning concepts like the COOP, right? The continuation of operation of practices and how to put those scenarios together. The CAP, which is all around scenario planning as well. Those all became now they're part of our everyday vocabulary here, kind of those risk management pieces. But we were faced with such external threats because we had so many of our kids who just couldn't continue their education, especially our international borders. And we were in a situation where there's not much we can do other than to try to be as creative as all get out.
You know, Dean, I wanted to ask you, you were just talking about the struggles of the last couple of years, and I've always felt that to a degree, no matter what business you have, the labor market is a non-issue, because great companies have a way of attracting great people. Yet at the same time, we're probably in one of the most difficult labor markets that we have seen in a long time. How do you try to hire and retain the best teachers and talent in the school when you're in this hugely competitive environment, even competing with all these checks that people are getting at home?
Right. And I heard that specifically, I guess a counter to that about the restaurant industry being like a prime example of where there's not a shortage there, right? There's a high demand for employees. That's what I've been told. And I've noticed, at least in the last 2 years on this topic, when we've posted positions, we've seen high numbers of people that are eager to work, right? And to work for us. So I don't know, maybe my industry is just a little bit different. We are a niche in the fact that we only boarding schools represent about 3% of all schools in the country.
Wow.
So we have very targeted areas and job boards where we post things that we know will be seen by other boarding school or independent school folks.
Ted, it goes back to what Ted's been saying, Dean, for the past year, is that the market is going to be self-rectifying itself. Government coming in to require certain minimum wages because of the need for employees. You have to pay well above that. It's almost like buying a house these days. You have to offer more than what's being asked, and with employees out there. But unless you have a high quality reputation, so maybe it points back to your reputation and what you've done at the school, that you haven't run into employee issues.
I think there's also for us, and I mean, it's one of the reasons I've been in independent school for most of my career. We appeal to the person that really loves working in a smaller school environment, who loves working with more of a mission vision based type of school where they feel like they have some independence over the curriculum, and can pitch clubs and run clubs and different things that they're passionate about. I think that's the beauty of independent schools, is we do have that as part of what defines us. Does that make sense, guys?
Oh, Dean, it resonates tremendously. We talk about this all the time because I know Ted and I would love to be a part of your school, of course, and come over to support your entrepreneurial programs. What we always discuss about entrepreneurship, it isn't about owning a business. It's about owning your respective position within the business. And it sounds like you let your teachers and your educators almost be their own entrepreneur at the school.
Absolutely. There are those opportunities. And one of the things I referenced earlier, I don't know if this is the time to segue to that, but last year we created a fund. My mom had passed away a few years back from pancreatic, but I told you she was a lifelong entrepreneur before the word became a buzzword and a powerful word that it is now. But we created a fund in her name, and it's a micro grant fund. And the purpose of it is my school will actually provide seed money to any student or student faculty combination or team of students who has an idea to pitch that will in some way contribute to school life, school culture, to make things better, or even in the community. And then they go through a whole rigorous process. They have to own, just like an entrepreneur would, right? So they assume the risk. The school doesn't. And the example I gave is a trio of kids, one from Vietnam, two local from Atlanta, came together, and they wanted to take a decrepit, old, defunct, decades-long unused greenhouse on campus.
Oh, I thought you were going to be talking about Ted and his birthday tomorrow. I'm sorry. Decrepit, old, defunct. Ted is, for our listeners, Ted is turning 52, so give the decrepit, old, defunct man a shout out. My apologies, Dean.
I'm almost collecting Social Security.
Yes.
No worries.
Sorry, Dean. I heard that and I suddenly was thinking, is he talking about Ted? Continue. I'm sorry.
And no, these are juniors in high school that had to put a 2-year vision together. And in 6 months, they've completely transformed the greenhouse. They've created a whole concept called the homestead. They've built a chicken coop, so they're selling eggs, they're selling produce on our little campus. It's pretty amazing to watch. And I invite you guys to come out and see it for yourselves and meet some of these kids. It will inspire you.
Yeah, I mean, that would be really cool. I know Lee and I have done that in many places, and we love being around entrepreneurs at all and any ages. And I'm curious if you tell our viewers today, our listeners today about, I feel like every entrepreneur eventually becomes a serial entrepreneur. And you created this website back in 2014 as a tribute to your heroes and heroines called teachlearnlead.net. And think about this, folks. That is the website, but it's like teach period, right? Learn period, lead period is really what it's about. Well, so what is this? And this is actually an edu library that you're using worldwide right now?
Yeah, this is one of those great stories. First of all, it deals with all three things I'm passionate about. And it started literally as an internal little website for one of my former schools, where I just wanted to create a kind of an oasis, a library online where they can come and just find all kinds of professional development resources, direct links to shows like yours, which I need to add to the site at some point. And basically, I started to curate lots of articles that were coming out, and using different social media platforms over the last 7 years, it just grew and grew and grew. So now it is a standalone, it's a website, it's not a monetized site. It's for teachers and leaders all over the country. It doesn't matter your walk of life, all over the world. If you go to that site, you will see categories and collections as if you were walking through a library, except this one is virtual, and the work has been done for you. So it's just beautiful. It feeds great into my sector, into the industry I'm in, to the work I do, just always trying to stay on top of kind of the latest trends and innovations. And it just grew. It grew exponentially over time and just gained a big followership.
So Dean, go into a little bit, I find it interesting when we're dealing with such specialists in their respective field, meaning yourself. For a common person like myself, my kids go to an elementary school, they go to high school, they graduate. What is the appeal to come to your school, of course? Why and what is the segment of the population that comes there? I love everything you offer, right? I love the work environment. Of course, you are getting them prepared not just for education, but also for life. But what is the type and the individual that may come to your school?
I think it starts with literally coming through the gates of campus, because you enter this 24-acre. Most of the land is wildlife refuge, preserved, as I said, on the river. So you automatically are hit with, this is a safe, serene, amazing learning environment, right? That's the first thing, that visceral thing you get when you come on campus. But the second one, I think what most people would say is they want a school where there are not 20, 30 kids in a class, but 8 to 10, where every single child is known. I do something with every student in the school, and they're called success chats, where I bring them in and I have about 30 questions. I don't use them all, but I do it at every grade level. And we have conversations about connecting the dots between who you are right now and who you want to be 5, 10, 15 years from now. I have sixth graders who are capable of having those types of conversations, because this environment is a safe one. It's a small one. It just nourishes those connections. So I think that's the demographic that we look for, people who want that, and also who want their students to be in that mix of day, but also to be surrounded by kids who are from all over the world, who see things differently, don't look at life.
So, Dean, obviously we're doing our podcast today over Zoom. We're not doing it face to face.
Sure.
I'm sure the last 18 months have been very challenging, and now we're still in uncertain times.
Sure.
How are you handling the whole coronavirus and Delta variant and managing that with the kids and their parents? Because I know it's challenging, as it is for schools across America.
Yeah, we made a decision early on that we were going to lean in and not be afraid of this. We're going to take it head on. So, as I told you back when the first outbreak started in March, with all the uncertainty and the executive orders coming down, we galvanized as a team and really figured things out. We created a kind of a medical advisory council. So we had a couple of our parents who were doctors who were all the way through for a year and a half, were giving us great advice. And also because we're small and we have the space, a lot of the things that were prescribed to schools for best practices, again, when you have 8 kids in a class, you're already socially distanced in that sense, right? And then we've been we tried to be very smart and judicious around the masking and when it's appropriate and where are the places that, like when kids are outdoors, is that a place where they need to be masked versus when they're indoors? We're always looking at that. And we've had a lot of support from our families. We haven't been in the news for any kind of pushback. It's been the opposite. CBS 46 did a story on us last year because of our safety measures and being an exemplary school during the COVID crisis.
So Dean, it sounds like, and again, as for our listeners out there, if you're listening, Dean, you're just rolling through this beautifully. I love before the show, we actually talked, you're like, hey, I'm not prepared for anything. And that's the best part, Dean, because you actually are, right? Every answer you're giving is so thorough and detailed. But I want to ask you some personal questions, as we're coming to a close of the podcast is, it seems like most things you do are very thoughtful, very strategic, because I'm just listening to your thought. You're involved in so many things. Give me something that you weren't prepared for. Give me an area where, hey, you had a rough patch and made a big mistake or a learning experience in you over the past few years with the school.
Specific to my current school?
Your current school.
Or career, yeah. It feels like anything other than the pandemic has been forgotten. If there there's adverse moments, because again, there were so many external forces that I couldn't as a leader control for, and they were nonstop. When you have a school that's 50% boarding and you learn that maybe 25% of those kids or 30 either have a fear about coming here because of kind of the geopolitical stuff that was going on, or just because airspaces were closed, embassies weren't issuing visas. That was a quarter or more of our school, and we're a nonprofit to begin with. So it was just, to me, it was this constant ramping up of new adversity. You get over one hill and another one higher seems to present itself to you.
So what you're telling us is your AQ is very high, Dean.
I think I would definitely give myself a pretty high rating on that. Yeah.
Well, so go back to me real quick. What was a large mistake you made, Dean, early in your career that you learned from and applied it here? Or maybe you don't make a mistake, Dean. Maybe
I think there are a lot.
You don't make mistakes, Lee.
Exactly. Yes. Well, I'll tell you, that's the funny part. I like the way Dean said, hey, all of the mistakes that were made pre-pandemic have been forgotten and washed away since the pandemic, except when you're happily married. I know Ted can speak to, my wife still brings up issues and mistakes from 2019. I'm like, this is before the pandemic. I think these things were washed away. They're actually not. Dean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think if my wife were on camera, you can get a whole long list from her of mistakes. But the one that I would say that this is I would say this is more philosophical, that I would make you chomp on this, but earlier in the career, in job searches and kind of figuring out next steps for myself, right? I think a lot of the letters and statements that you have to give to prospective employers, it was a lot more about maybe catering to what they wanted to hear, right? And I think that is a major mistake. And I don't know, maybe it takes age and some level of success and adversity to kind of figure out that's not what it's about. It should always come from the most authentic place possible, and then let that employer decide, the fate's in their hands anyway. Let them decide if they want to hire you or not. But don't put a lot of language in there and verbiage and words and sentiment that you don't really feel down deep inside. So I would say that shift to being a lot more purpose-driven is so crystal clear to me now. Whereas before, in my younger 20 years ago, I had that concept, but I didn't grasp it like I do now. Now
you're going to be much more, Dean's exactly right, Ted. And for our listeners out there, the authenticity that you provide and present may lose you opportunities, but the ones that you do get will be longer lasting and you won't waste a lot of time.
Dean, I wanted to ask you here, you mentioned at the get-go that you have a voracious appetite for leadership stuff. podcasts, books, things like that. What would you recommend for other leaders or entrepreneurs, other books to be reading or articles that you may be getting that not only could help them personally, but maybe help them lead their teams and their companies as well?
I'm a John Maxwell fan. I enjoy his work.
Yeah.
I also just was listening yesterday to probably 3 or 4 in a row of back podcasts from Ryan Hawk and the Learning Leader. I don't know if you know his work, but he brings some amazing thought leaders to the table for great conversations. Farnham Street has great podcasts. Again, these are all centered around leadership, and even some of Dave Ramsey's entrepreneurial podcasts. I like his finance podcast, but the entrepreneurial ones, because he brings in so many different thinkers.
Fair. So Dean, let me ask you one of the most important questions.
Sure.
As a business owner, as an entrepreneur, you can't do everything by yourself.
Correct.
That's obvious. And for any listener out there, if you think you can, and you are doing it by yourself, you're just limiting your scalability. Some of the questions we ask all of our guests, Dean, what are the top 3 things that you would recommend to grab a hold of quality employees and retain them? What are your top 3 skills?
Tom Peters, I think it was many years ago, talked about management by walking around, MBWA. I like MBTA, which is management by talking around. So that means,
Yeah.
And it's something that I'm not going to say that I've mastered, because there are too many days where I just get absorbed at my work and I can't do the rounds and get around to classrooms. But I love that part of it. And I know that teachers and faculty members appreciate that when they see a school leader engaging that way, right? So that's one. Another one for me is making sure to empower the people you work with, who work for you and with you, to give them responsibilities at a pretty high level where, they're going to make mistakes, but they're going to know that every time one is made, we're going to be able to talk through and learn from it, right? So it's that concept of better, not best. And then third for me is, you both have seen that software around accountability partners where, you have the watch and you go to an app, right? I think that's also important in a workplace. And I think I have definitely people in the organization. We engage in what's called, I don't know if you know Cal Newport's work for deep work or anything he's written about, this long sustained periods of focused work where you're in a room and you're just going to do two things that you've prioritized. So I've set up a system along with 1 or 2 other folks where we're doing that deep work in separate parts of the school at the same time. And before we go into those sessions, we're letting each other know what is our objective, what are our goals. And then at the end, we're honest about whether we stayed focused and achieved them and got through some of those deliverables that we were trying to. So those are just 3, and anything having to do with professional learning and development as a bonus, number 4. Constantly, those are the folks I'm looking for and the people I want to work with that are always looking to do better, but can celebrate the present, but always having that better mindset, that growth mindset, not a fixed mindset.
Dean,
Ted, before you wrap up, I want to compliment Dean real quick. My apologies. So much of us are living in the past and living in the future, but I want to compliment those 4 points, Dean, and the most important one was celebrate the present. So I just have to echo that, Ted. We're also focused on what's going on next, but we do forget to celebrate the present. So Dean, I just wanted to give you a shout out for a great point there that you brought up.
Guys, you have 1 more minute for another kind of entrepreneurial connection I would make for you around schools like Brandon Hall. And one of the ways, when I told you about leaning into challenges and adversity, one of, I think, really the beauties that came out of COVID is that we started looking outward for partnerships, community partnerships, right? So now, because of COVID, there's an organization that they're called Atlanta Workshop Players. They've become part of the Brandon Hall School. They've moved their operations to our campus. They've been in Atlanta for 40 years. And they're a high elite level theater production, music production organization for teens. Well, now they're part of our school.
Wow.
And that was birthed absolutely through COVID.
And
so
Dean,
always thinking along those lines.
Can other kids join the Center for Global Youth Leadership without actually going to the school?
Yes. The main programs that run with the Center for Global Youth Leadership run in the summer. There's 3 boot camps scheduled for next summer that they do fill up quickly, but yes. And those kids, the main requirement there is we do pre-screen. They've got to be ready and positioned to take a kernel of an idea, a seed, all the way to flower in 2 weeks. And during that 2 weeks, we're bringing in folks like you, Lee and Ted, to come and talk to these kids, impart some knowledge, some wisdom, some lesson for them to learn.
Well, so sign us up, Dean, by the way. Sign us up. We're in.
Love it.
I already know that. I speak for Ted. I speak for myself and anybody else that we know. Once Ted and I become a part of this, we will bring all of our associates that are much smarter and wiser than us. We'll bring them in after we speak because life is relative. So we don't want them to be before us, but you have our complete loyalty.
Guys, I'm all about the follow-up and making things actually take some action. And I want to once again invite you both. You don't need to wait till summer. Come and see the school. Come and visit us. Walk around these grounds. Let me introduce you to some of these kids. Show you some of their projects. I'm telling you, this is a beautiful place.
Well, we're definitely going to do that. Lee and I will get down there for sure, and we love becoming involved in everything and anything entrepreneurial that's going on in Atlanta. But it's always exciting seeing schools that are helping younger kids really learn this craft of entrepreneurship because it's the way that our country really grows. So for people that don't know about the Brandon Hall School and they watch this video, Dean, and they want to learn more about the school or the youth center, maybe even sending their child to your school, how can they learn more about the school and get in touch with you?
Really, the best way is through our website, brandonhall.org. There's an about page that leads to a kind of a message from me and then a lot of the things I've written about personally, and you could reach out to me directly. I'm always happy to tour, to talk. That's, we're small, and that's the advantage of our size too, that I give tours all the time as the president.
Dean, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
To email me directly at dfusto@brandonhall.org. So they can reach out to me directly, and happy to talk with them. Happy to also talk to people who are interested in partnerships and being speakers as well.
Well, Dean, we really appreciate your time today and educating us more on your business model and the school and what you're doing here in the Atlanta community. And for our viewers and people that listen to the podcast, I know that we are growing like crazy. Just think about what we talked about today. For many, many shows, Lee and I have talked about IQ, we've talked about EQ, we've talked about AQ, and now Dean has moved our triangle into a square or a rectangle with CQ. And you may be asking yourself at your own company, what is my cultural quotient? And we know how big culture is in companies, whether you have 5 employees or you have 500, it matters because it's the backbone of an organization and a company and how you grow. So Dean, thanks again so much for sharing your story with us. Lee and I will definitely get to your school. And folks, we'll look forward to seeing you again next week right here on the Shrimp Tank.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp